thank you. Well, I'm joined now by the Foreign Affairs analyst Tim Marshall and the Conservative MP Heidi Allen, who visited the island of Lesbos on the front line of the migrant crisis earlier this year. Welcome to both of you. Is this really a breakthrough deal?
Not yet, it's not. Mr Tusk, I thought, was full of hyperbole yesterday. He said that the days of irregular travel to Europe are over. That's quite a statement to make. They're not. There'll be another 2,500 people coming today anyway. The practicalities of the deal, theoretically, it looks good. One for one sounds a great idea. But A, the practicalities of sorting out who is Syrian and who isn't, which country they come out of and which country they go to. And then the biggest, because Libya has not been mentioned in this, and Libya's getting worse, and there could be, what happens if you go across to Italy? Because the agreement is between Greece, they tow people back to Turkey. But the biggest problem is the one for one. This is what I was kind enough to asked me on this programme last week, and I said that Merkel hasn't got anything other than Plan A. This is Plan A with finesse. The Plan A is that the European 28 will each take a proportion of these refugees. Well, they won't. And so how are you going to have the one for one? Who is going to take them?
And that's the problem, because that's already been rejected, that sort of quota system, if you like, certainly by leaders like David Cameron. Do you think that is what's necessary to make anything work in terms of solving this migrant crisis? I
do think there has to be an element of that, absolutely. And I agree, it sounds great in principle, but it's getting people to sign up to it and agree. Because I think, to be fair to European leaders, so far I suspect they've been rabbits in the headlights, and this may well focus their minds, and at least they're talking. You know, that's a great start. But I do think you're right, it will come to an end point where actually this is about numbers.
Right, so you think in the end quotas will be necessary. Do you think EU leaders will sign up to taking a proportion based on, I don't know, population size of their own countries, a proportion of the migrants and refugees that have come across from the Middle East?
I think if they can't come to a sensible decision between themselves, then yes, it may well come to that.
I mean, is visa-free travel for 75 million Turks an acceptable price to pay for Turkey's cooperation?
I'm not an expert on, you know, kind of the economic situation in Turkey. I don't know. Do we need to do a deal? Do we need to work together and find things that work for each of us? Absolutely.
Right. I mean, it sounds like this quid pro quo is necessary in desperate times, but it's quite a big price to pay. And Turkey, rightly or wrongly, has extracted a fairly big prize.
Who's in the driving seat? The Turks. They have doubled the amount of money they've asked for, which they're going to get.
3 to 6.
If the deal goes through. There's a bunch of problems we can come up with, some of which we've already said, but here's another two. For visa-free for all 75 million Turks to be allowed to have travel, not work permits, but visa-free, starting in June, Cyprus, an EU member, has to agree. The price for Cyprus agreeing that Turks can travel EU-free are you recognise the government, the Greek Cypriot government, in Cyprus. Well, and that's probably not going to happen, so that's one reason why the deal may not happen. And the other thing I would say, at the moment you're in, supposing this is looking at it very unpleasantly, you're making a huge profit out of these water jackets that don't work, the life jackets that don't work at the moment. People are dying, you don't care, you're making a lot of money.
I saw thousands of those in those.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge market, they just simply don't work. Dive out of that, no pun intended, and get into paperwork. Because the paperwork, if you've got 75 million Turks, every single one of these refugees will now try to get Turkish papers. Some of them will get forged Turkish papers, and they will keep coming.
And the unintended consequences do seem to be, as you say, sort of never-ending. I'd like to hear a bit about your experiences then in Lesbos, talking about these life jackets, these water jackets that Tim mentioned. What did you see?
Well, foolishly, there's me when I see one that's branded with Yamaha or something on the back of it. I said to the aid workers, oh, great, at least that's a proper one. Oh, no, they're really clever. They print them with known brands, and then people actually believe that's.
If you look at it, it says Yamokoha, not Yamaha.
No, some of them
are knockoffs. Well, either way,
forgive it. Yeah,
so these are what are being handed out.
Well, no, not handed. People pay for these, €30 each.
Right.
And they simply don't work.
What else did you see when you were there in Lesbos? I mean, to some extent, something's got to be done because the front line is struggling, to put it mildly.
Absolutely, and that is, in a sentence, what I saw. Greece was desperately under-resourced, completely abandoned, left on its own to deal with this. You know, it was the Greek restaurateurs that were backing up vans with food for the local people, not humanitarian agencies. So if this focuses the mind and gets European partners around the table, it has to be a good start, because that has not been happening as far as I'm concerned.
What do you think, Heidi Allen, about the UK sort of opt-out of the resettlement of asylum seekers that are already in Europe? They've obviously agreed to take the ones from the camps in Jordan and Syria. Do you think think that is justifiable and sustainable by the UK government?
I think probably from a legal point of view and from our desire about how our role with Europe will be going forward, yes, it is. Morally, is it the right thing to do? I'd probably question that.
You would?
Yeah.
Have you made that clear to the government?
Yes, I've said I think that as a situation, because it's a very fluid situation, the volumes of people coming are just incredible, that our decisions on numbers has to be fluid as well, and that we should review that if we need to.
So you don't think it's morally justifiable. In terms of public sentiment, has it changed? Has it gone from sympathy because of that very emotive picture of Aylan Kurdi, and perhaps before, that people had a lot of sympathy for migrants and refugees coming from Syria? Is that still the same, or has it changed?
There has been some change. Basically, the British people do not want the problem in any way to come to Britain, whether it's coming from Greece or whether it's coming from Calais. But of course, the practical point is not what our polls show day in, day out, month in, month out, but the impact on the referendum debate. And I think the problem that David Cameron faces as Prime Minister is if he didn't have the referendum hanging over him, I think he would probably feel he had a bit more flexibility about what to do. The problem is if he does something which is represented, fairly or unfairly, as being soft on Europe, soft on immigration, that will play into the European referendum campaign. So I think the referendum campaign closes his options in a bit in terms of domestic politics.
And looking at it from a geopolitical point of view, when you look at Turkey, if there is visa-free travel and there are more discussions about potential membership further down the line, I mean, that could be way off. But Turkey, of course, sits in a very strategic position. On its right-hand side is Syria. I mean, it is the sort of border through. How could that change the whole terms of trade of this debate if those things come into play?
They have the whip hand. Turkey is the dominant partner between the EU and Turkey in this discussion, which is why the EU is bending over backwards to give it what it wants so far. That's Donald Tusk and Angela Merkel bending over backwards. When you get down to the 28 leaders of the 28 countries, I'm not sure they are going to bend over backwards.
So do you not think it's going to hold, this deal?
I think, well, we've already said there's a bunch of problems about it holding. Damien Grammaticus, your correspondent, pointed out the legal challenges that will come to it from the United Nations, UNHCR and others. But Turkey is doing an amazing job, actually, of taking care of people, albeit under difficult conditions. They've already spent 10 billion of their own money. They're about to get 4.5 billion out of the EU. But I'm not sure that the deal, A, will go through next week. If it does go through next week, will it stick? Two final things to say. It's coming too late for Merkel's regional elections on Sunday. Everyone in Germany is still saying, hang on, you're going to do a deal where we're going to get more people. And secondly, not the EU accession, but the visa talks for the Turks, they are demanding that they start in June, not in October. And in June, of course, the Brits have the referendum. All this, again, plays into the referendum.
Thank you both very much.